Hi there, everybody. Jeff Danlick here with Our Curious World, bringing you stories of the mysterious, the unexplained, and the just plain weird. You probably assume from my website and my other videos I've made that this is really stories about the paranormal, ghosts, Bigfoot, things like that. But I want this channel to be more than that. I find mysteries everywhere. I find it in science and religion, and especially in history. And that's what I wanted to bring you today. I wanted you to bring a history mystery, if you will. To wit, did Adolf Hitler manage to escape the bunker in Berlin and make his way to freedom? This story's been covered a lot over the years. It goes way back. So I don't think I have really anything amazingly new to add to this. But I look at this from kind of an objective and logical standpoint. And the people who are familiar with the story might still find it interesting to look at the from that perspective. So let's take a look at it and see if we can make sense of this story outside of what's been already done traditionally. So the story basically is that on April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler and his wife of one day, Eva Braun, there's a picture of them together here. This was probably taken quite a few years earlier, but you get the idea here. They basically were trapped in their bunker beneath the Reichstag building as the Soviet forces were closing in on the city. To keep themselves from being taken prisoner by the approaching Soviet army, they decided to take their own lives. However, some people think that they might have gotten out of there, actually. That they snuck out of the bunker and flew out of the city into safety. However, let's look at the story as history records it, and which I think is probably pretty accurate, is that at the time, on April 30th, 1945, Berlin really was in a pretty serious situation. The Soviet armies had surrounded it just a few days earlier. There was a million-man Soviet army that was encroaching on all sides of the city. The Reichstag, being centrally located, was one of the last places in the city still under German control. Here you can see in this map how the Russians were moving around the city here, getting closer all the time. And Hitler had opportunities to escape earlier. He was actually advised by some of his generals that he should get out and maybe flee to Austria where he could do a last stand. But he decided he wanted to stay in the city because he wanted to. If the Third Reich was going to be destroyed, he wanted to go with it. He'd built it after all, and so it made sense that he'd want to finish with it. However, he definitely did not want to be taken prisoner by the Soviets, certainly not alive. And so at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon of April 30th, according to witnesses that were there, he apparently shot himself in one of his rooms there in the bunker. Next to him died his wife, who died from ingesting cyanide capsules. And that was apparently the end of them. The bodies were supposedly taken to the surface, and there they were doused with kerosene or petrol, I suppose, and set on fire. And that was the end of the Third Reich for the most part. The remains were then thought to have been recovered later that day, or actually the next day, I suppose, when the Soviets finally took the Reichstag building and they discovered the remains of the couple in a trench in the garden behind the Reichstag building, and these were recovered and taken back to Russia for identification. So that's the story as history tells it. The conspiracy theory is that Hitler and Braun faked the suicides. They actually didn't kill themselves at all. They just let people believe they had, or they had been in cahoots with all the other people inside the bunker with them. And they escaped out to the surface, where they were then flown in a light aircraft out of the city to areas that were still under German occupation further to the north. And from there they made their way to Norway. The theory goes is that in Norway they managed to get aboard one of the last surviving U-boats, in this case the U-977. There's a picture of it here as it appeared in Argentina many months later. And they departed from a little port town called Kristiansand on the 2nd of May, 1945. This would have been a couple of days after his alleged suicide. And after a 66-day voyage, the submarine made its way into Buenos Aires, where it promptly surrendered to the Allies. And supposedly Hitler and Braun, or maybe just Hitler himself, we don't know for sure, had managed to get off before they surrendered and were sequestered somewhere, guarded by Argentinian Nazis or other German Nazis that had made it out of Germany into Argentina, which was kind of a favorite destination for fleeing Nazis at the time. And there they basically spent the rest of their life, if not in freedom, at least in comfort and safety. And that's been bolstered by the fact that people supposedly have seen Hitler at restaurants and cafes and things like that. Reports going all the way into the 1960s. So supposedly he's been seen all over South America, just having a good time. But is this really possible? Could this actually have happened? Could he have really gotten out of there? It's kind of hard to imagine, but let's look at it from a logical standpoint. First of all, if you look in this map of the bunker, you can see that there was an escape route very close to the room that he took his own life in. Those are the rooms in blue numbers. I think it was number 18 is the one where he took his own life. And so, yeah, he could have made it to the surface pretty easily. It would have put himself in a lot of danger doing that, because in the bunker, at least he was out of the line of fire, but he could have gotten to the surface, I suppose. Well, once he got there, he was supposedly met by an airplane. Now, remember, at this point, the fighting was very close. It was actually just blocks away at some points, certainly within a mile. So he would have to find an airplane, would have to make it in there under heavy fire from the Russians on all sides and find a place to land. There's only one airplane that really was capable of doing that. It was an airplane called the Feisler Fi-156 Storch, which means stork in German. This is a light two-seater reconnaissance airplane that was used by the Luftwaffe for almost the entire war. And it had the capability of landing and taking off in very short distances. It could land and take off within a couple of 100 feet almost anywhere. It had that kind of power in it, and it was that light an airplane. It was a two-seater, so you could fit a couple of people in the back. So it was entirely feasible that they could have fit into this airplane and been flown out. Now the problem, of course, would have been if they did this in the daytime, they would have been immediately spotted and come under heavy machine gun fire from the Russian forces. If they waited at night, they might have gotten out in the dark, but again, they would have to have waited for several hours until it grew dark enough. I don't know if Hitler and Braun could have survived more than a few minutes on the surface like that. They would have to be whisked away pretty quickly, but that's the only way he could have done it. It's possible, I suppose. The streets would have been a mess, but he still might have been able to get enough of it cleared to get a couple of 100 feet to get into the air. Then you have to fly over the Soviet positions and all the gunfire, and the air is full of Russian airplanes as well. But they might have made it into an area that was still under their control, up in the north here, towards Denmark. And then from there, they would have had to fly over to Norway. Now, that would have been difficult too, because now it's not the Russians. Now you have to worry about the American and the British airplanes in the air, because the Allies had complete air control, air supremacy at that point. So flying in daytime at all would have been extremely difficult, probably suicidal at that point. So they might have waited at night, made their way to Norway. And so they could have possibly done that. They got on the U-boat. Here's the other problem. Now, the U-977, if you know anything about U-boats, is a very small boat. It's dark, it's noisy, it's crowded. You can see the interior of it here. You can see this is looking pretty clean in here, but a boat in that at that time would have been just filthy inside. It would have been possible for Hitler to have any kind of quarters or anything. Even the captain's cabin on a U-boat is really like 8 by 10 feet. So think about how small that is. Just big enough really for a cot and a desk. And you're going to put Hitler and maybe his wife in this room for 66 days. I don't know if that's possible. Hitler's health was very poor. He used a wide range of drugs, including at points cocaine and amphetamines. And he also is thought to have had Parkinson's disease. There's actually quite a bit of consensus that he was showing all the signs of that, especially towards the end of his life. The man was only 56 years old. You look at photos of him from that period, though, and he looks much older. He looks almost elderly. So the idea that he could have survived the rigors of almost, 2 months at sea is pretty difficult to imagine. It's possible, I suppose, but I don't see how he could have done it without a lot of help. Finally, even if he did make it to South America, he wouldn't have gone to cafes or restaurants or any public places where he could have been identified. He would have stayed in probably some kind of a compound. And if he had those sort of health issues, it's likely he would not have lived more than a few years anyway. Making one suspect about all these reports of seeing him out and about, having cafes and things, kind of suspect. Why would he have gone to Argentina, you might want to ask yourself. It's because Argentina was kind of a haven for German Nazis. After the war, many Nazis made their way through various means to Brazil and Argentina, Paraguay. So it would make sense that that's where he would have gone if he'd gone anywhere. But it's unlikely that he would have been able to survive very long, like I said. So why is there so much controversy about this? Why is this even a question? Well, it appears that right after the war, Joseph Stalin, the Soviet dictator, made it kind of ambiguous whether or not they had Hitler's body. He even implied that they had not found Hitler in the rubble, which led people to speculate that maybe he had gotten out of there. Now, this was even though the Soviets had positively identified the remains by dental records. Just within days of finding the body, they already knew they had Hitler. So Stalin was basically just playing a game. He was trying to sow discord among the Allies, leave them guessing, if you will, kind of a little game he was playing. I think one of the reasons that this theory has been so popular is because Hitler died in such a unspectacular way. At his own hand, he escaped justice, and it just seems unfair to a lot of people that he would have gotten away with this. And so these kinds of conspiracy theories keep people thinking, well, maybe it's possible that someday he'll be captured and brought to justice. And so I think that's one of the driving factors behind this whole thing. And plus, conspiracy theories are just fun. They're kind of fun to think about what ifs and go from there. So I suspect that's probably really what's at play here. So it sounds like the stories of Hitler making his way out of the Berlin at the last moment is probably a lot of fun to think about, but it most likely didn't happen. It's clear that Hitler did die in that bunker on April 30th, 1945, just as history maintains. That may not be as exciting to think that he somehow managed to escape, but the facts are what they are, putting at least this conspiracy theory to bed once and for all. Hey, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, or maybe subscribe if you want. I'd sure appreciate that. I usually like to end these videos with some amusing saying or anecdote, but this subject's a little too grim for that, so I'm going to end it something more appropriate to the occasion. I'm just going to say, sic semper tyrannis, which means thus always to tyrants. So until next time, this is Jeff Daly signing off. Thank you.